Um, so for the past 3 years, I have been examining an alternative form of therapy, and I have been labeling this form of therapy Bimanual Rhythmic Practices. And if you don't know, bimanual is just a fancy name for two-handed. And I have found a lot of correlations to use these methods for cognitive development, emotional regulation, and preparation for mindfulness training. So, just so you know, I am an interdisciplinary student, and I am studying psychology with a focus in contemplative neuroscience, as well as second degree in music theory. So this has been my work over the past 3 years, and I just want to let you guys know that this work is not done. It will take about 3 to 5 more years to draw like a final conclusion, but this is what I have so far. We'll skip that. I'm going to try and keep some of the language a little bit more simple. So a few years ago, my life kind of changed, right? And I started not necessarily doing different things. It wasn't necessarily what I was doing that was different. It was how I was doing it. So take rock climbing, for example. Here in Boulder, there are so many rock climbers, and I climb with a lot of them. And one thing I notice is a lot of people get wrapped up in what they're doing. It's chasing the next route, climbing the hardest thing they can. It's, you know, this great chase of ego. And what I began to notice is I stopped caring about a lot of that. And what I cared about more was each moment while I was climbing. I started caring about that next move and what that move felt like. And rather than rushing it and getting it done quickly and more efficiently, I would take the time to do it with proper form and technique and just to feel each moment. And I started to ask, why? Why am I thinking like this? Why do the people I'm climbing with not also think like this? So I started to examine what makes up thinking and how do we learn about thinking? And what is thinking? Well, I can tell you what learning is learning can be broken down into task-specific or task-general traits. So something like task-specific might be taking a ball and throwing it up and down. That is one skill that doesn't transfer over to all that many other skills. But something that would be more task-general is hand-eye coordination. So although I'm doing the same thing, the ability to be able to reach out and grab things in coordination, to drink a cup of water, that would be something that would be more task general. So our question is, what trains these task general teachings? So here's a little bit of a better definition of task general. It's process specific rather than content or stimulus specific. It should generalize across tasks involving core targeted processes. And we'll talk more about what those core targeted processes are. So one thing that is actually domain general with your learning is meditation. That's why meditation has gotten so much hype and has been taught so worldwide. Here we can see this is an EEG. The person on the left, this is mind activation of just a normal person doing some sort of mindfulness practice. On the right, these are Rinpoches, and these Rinpoches have been practicing meditation for anywhere from 25 years to a little bit over 45 years. And what we can see here is this is more brain activation. In specific, we are starting to see gamma wave activation. And gamma wave is this amazing form of brainwave activity where you start to tie ideas together. These are those aha moments where you're like, oh, I get it now. That's a spark of gamma wave activation. And here we can see they are sustaining this gamma wave activation. And we think they might even perceive the world differently. They will perceive reality different than someone else that hasn't had this training. You know what else is domain general learning? Music. Music is another form of learning that will actually transfer between different tasks. That is another reason why music has gotten so much attention in the learning community. Unfortunately, we saw a little bit of a dip, but hopefully we'll be bringing that back soon. Yeah. But what caught my attention is meditation can be really hard, and especially in young ages, it can be very daunting. Same with music. I love music, don't get me wrong, but I couldn't even start learning it till I was about 13, 15. And even then, it took me another 10 years to really get into learning it. So I was always a kid who loved to learn, and I was always looking for something. And you know what? I found something that kind of satisfied that urge. I didn't find it till I was 24, 26. But what that was juggling. And now what I believe is that juggling is a domain general learning experience. I believe that it can cross all sorts of different core brain processes and help us develop cognitively, and it can even be used emotionally for regulation. And it can be the perfect segue into these other more complex or maybe, higher potential domain general learnings. So let's look at some of this. Currently, I want to ask, how many people struggle with attention? We have quite a few hands go up. And here we can see 1 in 5 children in the US struggle with learning and attentional issues. After that, how many people struggle with activity and being active and struggle with not becoming inactive in their life? We have a few, and this is here in Boulder, Colorado. Oh, sorry, we'll come back to that. And here we can see that inactivity is growing across the United States. So there's something about that, and one thing I love about juggling is it can be a very interactive skill. How many people have struggled with some sort of, mental process disorder, some sort of psychological thing, some sort of neurological thing? I know I have. So these are all things that we're beginning to look for. And the last thing I want to point out is how many people have struggled with escapism, looking for some way to escape from the present moment. Same here. That is actually the number one thing that got me interested on this subject, was this task was something that could help me be here while escaping a little bit, but still conscious enough to be here. So this subject can get really complex. So I want to just say, hold on tight. I'm going to try and make it as simple. Don't worry about this graph. This is actually a way of trying to map out what meditation is and how it's happening. You can find it, the source down there. It's kind of fun, but we won't be doing that. First, we'll start with just cognitive development. And what cognitive development is a construction of thought processes, including remembering, problem solving, decision making, and this occurs from childhood all the way up to adulthood. First thing I want to talk about is mind wandering, right? Mind wandering is something we all do. We do it great. We're almost always doing it. If we're not doing that, that is awesome. That's a moment. And it can be defined by the lengths that the mind goes to self-generate thought, coupled with its apparent functionality, suggests that mind places a higher priority on such cognition than many other mental acts. And that's what I'm saying. Your mind wants to wander. And to get it to pay attention to something, well, that's why we have to actually train that. Here we can see what we call the default mode network. This is what mind wandering looks like. Back here, this is your hippocampus or your limbic network, and that's mostly what controls your emotions. And let's see here, we have your hopes, your dreams, and the main thing I want to point out is this self-narrative, right? This part of your brain is using language and a little bit of combination with your frontal cortex so it can speak to itself. And that's a lot of the ways that we perceive reality is through some sort of narrative. And now what's really cool is meditation tries to get us away from speaking that narrative. In fact, most instructions of meditation are if you start thinking, or basically if you start talking to yourself in some form or manner, bring yourself back to whatever your intention is, which is typically the breath while we're starting. And what begins to happen is we take this practice and we start here, but then we start to build up and build up and build up and build up. And this could be called going from a state of mind to a trait of mind. So here are some really cool concepts. I'm going to do my best to show examples of all these things while juggling, just for a little bit of fun, because learning can be fun. And that's one of the number one things I want to help bring back. So I'm just going to kind of talk loud. While I'm juggling, I am placing my attention on multiple different things. I'm standing, I am balancing, I am keeping multiple balls all going at one time while I'm talking to you, while I'm maintaining this presentation. So the next thing I'm looking at is refocusing. So in order to do all this, I have to refocus each moment while I'm looking at each ball, while I'm thinking about what word to say next. And these are all different things my brain is doing pretty effortlessly at this point. Now my intention, right? Right now I have an intention to maintain this juggle, but I'm also having a secondary intention to maintain this presentation. My awareness is my ability to just perceive all of this information that is in my surroundings. So my awareness is on each ball's flight pattern as it comes up, not each ball all the time. I might also be listening to audience cues to see how y'all are responding, or what the lights are doing. And then we have executive attention. Now this one is tricky because it's the tendency to override your habitual patterns. And it's kind of a lot of these other ones, for example, I was able to do just out of implicit memory. But I needed a little bit extra executive attention to properly formulate these words and not just go into a habitual pattern. And the most important thing I want to point out is integration. Is how do we use all these things together? Moving along, we have two types of functioning. Implicit is just like breathing. It's your automatic processes. Right now, this is an implicit function for me because I've trained it enough. And most anything we train enough can become implicit. But the second I do that, that's a little bit of explicit. For that, there's a moment of explicit. And essentially, your brain only has so much attention it can afford to give at any time. So we use both of these systems to split up how much energy we have and how we manage it. So going back to this executive attention, we've done a lot of studies on it, and essentially the one thing I want to point out is that you can start training it at a very early age. At 4 to 6 years old, when they started training executive attention, they found that young males started becoming less aggressive and started using their words more. And that's pretty huge for like 4 to 6 years old to use their words. I mean, I was impressed. Maybe that's not impressive for everyone, but I was blown away by it. And the development of executive attention allows self-regulation within areas of emotionality, delay of gratification, compliance, moral development, social competence, empathy, adjustment, cognitive, and academic performance. I don't know about y'all, but I struggled with a lot of those for a lot of my life. And suddenly in my late 20s, I got a little bit better at it, and maybe it was because I was growing up, but I find it very interesting that at the same time, it's where I picked up juggling. And this was the first time that I saw myself relaxing into monotony, where I would practice the same trick over and over. I would drop it, and I'd be like thrilled to pick it up and get to do it again. And I don't know why that is, and that's why I'm studying it. So here's just an example of all the different functionings that happen in your brain at any given moment. So you can see there's a lot going on, and we won't go into details with this because we only have so much time. But here's something I want to point out, and these are the 4 stages of competence. And, you know, basically, at first, we don't even know that we don't know. And that's this first stage. And then we start to realize, hopefully, that we don't know. Then we can do something about it, and we can learn how to do it. And if we learn that well enough, then we don't even have to think about it. It just becomes intuition. It just becomes second nature. It just becomes implicit. I mentioned a little bit of state versus trait, but this is a really huge category, and it's all about just trying to figure out how can we convert states of mind into more permanent traits. So state of mind, a less, desirable one would be getting frightened, and getting frightened maybe in social situations. Well, if that happens enough times, that state might become a trait, and that trait might be called shyness. So there's an example to help you digest that. So these are all different general mental training areas. So if you train these, they will apply across many different tasks. Moving on. Let's just skip that because I just don't have enough time to try and tackle that. Right now, I'm trying to map out every area that juggling affects. And here, this is a very small map. This is just the last couple of days of just trying to get it going. But you can see how I'm trying to get it in a specific task is training, like object training. How that applies to a general task, pattern analysis. What part of the brain it affects the visual cortex growth. And that's really cool. One of my favorites, just to point out, I haven't drawn it all the way back, but preventing neurodegenerative diseases. And the way that juggling does this is through neuroplasticity. Same with most bimanual rhythmic practices, like playing music. So what exactly do BRPs have in common with mindfulness? I've been kind of hinting that along the way, but let's go in a little bit more. Intention setting. So whenever it comes to learning a new trick, I can do this with ease, but if I want to throw a ball behind my back, I have to set the intention so I can know to have the executive intention to do that move really quick. Woo, and then come back to it. So that's just a small observation of me practicing intention setting and then observing if I was able to maintain that intention and not just sit there in my normal state that I would of just juggling that normal 3-ball pattern. So we'll talk a little bit about meditation here, right? We can see what meditation kind of breaks down to is we start meditating, we're right here, right? And then we start to mind wander. And all our different little areas of the brain with our domain network start to activate. And then we become aware that we're mind wandering. And then we bring ourselves back. We reorient our awareness back to sustaining focus. So one thing I really like is juggling is a really great, just observable task of this. So if I'm juggling, my focus is here. If I lose my focus, I might, I lost my focus. Now I can try it again and try and keep my intention of maintaining focus until I lose focus again. And I can keep timing that, and I can keep working on it. I can keep having something real time that can show me, hey, am I doing good? Am I not doing good? So that's one thing I really like about juggling. So we've been talking a little bit about attention and awareness and intention, and this is some really cool stuff that some of the teachers here, Peter Grossenbacher and Jordan Qualia, I study under them a lot, and this is the work that they came out with, and they believe that all contemplative practices might share something in common. What they think might be in common is what they called intended attention. So that's attending that has been directly specified by an attention. So it might be breathing, right, with meditation. So that's my intended attention, is that I'm going to focus on my breath. Then we have attention to intention. So intentional modulation and or monitoring of an intention. So while I'm meditating, am I paying attention? Am I still breathing? I have to come back and check if I'm still doing my intention, or did my attention go somewhere else and did I not even notice? The last one is awareness of transient information. This is kind of like that present moment awareness. So moving forward, when you combine all three together, that's when you have mindfulness, right? What else I believe is when you combine them all together, you have BRPs. You have bimanual rhythmic practices. Because if I'm not doing all those, then I might be juggling, and I might be thinking about juggling, I might be watching juggling, but until I combine all of them, I'm not doing what I like to call bimanual rhythmic practices. And that's where I want to draw the differentiation between doing BRPs and just juggling, doing BRPs and just playing music, doing BRPs. Well, that doesn't really apply to meditation unless you got your hands going, but. So now we'll move along and we'll start to talk about a little bit of emotional regulation. The variety of processes by which individuals modulate the presence, timing, and character of emotions or their expression. So this is a really cool one that made it digestible for me. It's called the process model of emotional regulation. And this is occurring all the time, moment to moment. This keeps reoccurring. Right now, I'm in a situation, I can modify that, or I can choose before I even get there to even go in that. And then I can pay attention to this situation, or I can zone out. Like if I'm watching a scary movie and it gets too intense, like I can think about birthday cake, and suddenly I'm able to handle it. Or, I could be like, oh, it's just a scary movie, right? That's fine. Or I can give a response where I'm gonna move away. And like I said, this keeps happening over and over and over again. And not only is this happening, but it's probably happening on several different goals that you are maintaining at one time. So not only am I watching this movie, but I might also have a date, and I'm trying to entertain her. And I might also have some food that I'm cooking. And I might also have, something else that's going on, a dog, and, all of these things are maintaining and happening all at one time. That's why our mind gets so busy. So you can see this is kind of what it looks like whenever all that is going on. This is one time that circuit running through. All these different processes are happening. Something to really pay attention to is the prefrontal cortex, and these are just two different areas of it. But this is the area that thinks of yourself, and this is the area that thinks of yourself in relationship to the world. So moving along a little bit, I want to talk about titrating. So titrating is something really cool where, because we have all those processes going, we can recognize whenever one of those processes is becoming too much for us, and then we can back off of it a little bit. So one thing I've really liked about juggling is if I get in a high anxiety moment and I don't want to leave the situation altogether, I can't just deploy my attention somewhere else. There's just a lot of situations where I can't emotionally regulate myself well. But what I've found is if I use something where I have to sustain my attention, then I can maintain presence more. So if I'm in a conversation and it gets a little too heated, I might just start juggling. And somehow I'm able to stay in that conversation enough to where I can keep it going. And I won't check out completely. I won't escape, but I'll kind of titrate a little bit. And I'll bounce my attention back and forth so I can manage it and I can regulate my emotions enough. Sustained attention. A really cool thing about sustained attention is that the mind tends to quiet, resulting in a diminishment of distracting thoughts. So this is what's going to be applied for anywhere that we try to use juggling as a form of therapy. The interesting thing is this is also what happens with yoga. So mindfulness meditation involves attending to emotions without cognitive fixation of the emotional experience. So if we can kind of titrate where our attention is going, we might be able to just experience our emotions without cognitive restructuring of it or attachment to those emotions. So one thing I like about yoga is it's a common entry point for, most beginners of mindfulness. And all these asanas, these poses, what they do is they take up a lot of your cognitive mind when you're beginning. So you might be doing some sort of stretch, right? And you're like, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this. But then eventually you start like, I'm just focusing on this, I'm just focusing on this. And you stop thinking so much about the, I don't want to do this. You start relaxing into just letting those emotions be there and let them run on their own. You don't have to tend to them. You don't have to give them a narrative. This looks like it's important. Selective implementation of frontal executive dependent strategies to reduce emotional interference during competing cognitive demands and not fearing emotion. That's just fancy words for what I was just saying. So, now yoga is pretty cool because there's a physical aspect of it. But even still, sometimes it doesn't get all that ramped up. Now, especially with meditation, let's say sitting meditation, right? It doesn't get that ramped up. I don't really use my body all that much all the time. And sometimes when I'm really in an emotional crisis, like I can't just sit on the mat. Like I'm still not that strong after, I don't know, a couple decades of practicing meditation. But what I can do is I can go to the gym and work out. And suddenly, like, I can handle things a little bit better for a little while, and then I can deal with it better. Well, what's happening there is what's called transient hypofrontality theory. Essentially what we're doing is we're redistributing energy that we would typically put to our prefrontal cortex. And because we're using all these muscles and stuff, we need an extra boost to our cerebellum and to our muscles. So for a temporary moment, that PFC I was talking about, the prefrontal cortex, basically just shuts down. It just powers down. It'll be right there when we're ready for it again, but right now we're just gonna not worry about it. And for that moment, I get a break from that emotional crisis. You know what's really cool about juggling and bimanual rhythmic practices is there is a physical aspect to it. So if I need to, my practice doesn't just have to be that, but it can be over here, coming over here, around, and switching up patterns, and suddenly my mind is a little bit more quiet because I've activated this transient hypofrontality and I've had to redistribute energy from my prefrontal cortex to other parts of my brain. And this is just a little bit more of a detailed explanation of how different parts of your brain start to shut down and in what order they start to shut down to where you're just at a very basic level. This is all from motor output. So just reiterating, meditation a lot of times has that sustained attention aspect, but it doesn't have that exercise, right? But you notice, I'm going this way. So it doesn't have that exercise, right? Exercise doesn't necessarily have that sustained attention, but it does have that transient hypofrontality. Now, BRPs is able to have both of those. And I wish I could talk about compassion because there's some really cool research about developing compassion and juggling, but today I just won't have time. So one thing I really like about juggling is it's pretty low risk. I mean, it's pretty hard to get hurt by some balls that are usually filled with beans, but you can get hurt working out. And it has even been showed that there are some side effects possible with meditation. So we won't go too much into those side effects, but there are adverse effects that can happen with meditation. But when it comes to juggling, just about anyone can do it anytime, and there's very little risk. So one of my things I'm really interested in is, who needs a really safe place? Children. Children can't fully explain a lot of what's going on in the world, especially in their world. So if we can create some sort of form of mindfulness training, cognitive development, emotional regulation that's safe, well, maybe this is what we need to start teaching to them when they're young, and I don't know. Moving along. So these are some questions that I'm still answering. What is the suitability and exact method for optimal emotional regulation dosage with juggling? This is what my current research is now. That'll be done in about 3 months, so I'll be focusing on that over the summer. What are the precise instructions for a contemplative juggle? That's what my final paper is in another class, so that results will be out pretty soon too. And then flow state training. I wish I could talk about flow state. It is becoming really popular, especially in Silicon Valley, and they believe that it can boost the brain up to 500%. I think that flow state is directly correlated to juggling. That's why juggling and many other arts that are similar to this are called flow arts. Lastly, I mentioned compassion already, so it's another thing I'm researching. There's this little graph that I'm basing my compassion training off of. You can find that in Mindfulness Compassion. It's a cool book. So one thing I want to talk about is they're actually already doing this research elsewhere. Ken Byrne over at the Ottawa Institute of Anxiety and Trauma Clinic was testing PTSD patients, and what he was having them do was, mind you, these patients have already had forms of therapy, so they weren't just like fresh out of PTSD. They've been worked with a little bit. But he would teach them how to juggle in about 30 to 60 minutes. And once they could just do this simple pattern, then he would introduce their threat stimuli that would trigger them. So might be yelling at them, might be running around frantically in the room, something like that. And whenever that threat was first administered, they would drop the ball. And they'd be like, oh, you caught my attention, and I lost my attention. I wasn't able to sustain my attention on what my intention was. And then they do it again. And the threat would come, and they drop it again. Until finally, that threat would come, and they were able to keep juggling. And they were ecstatic about it. They realized it in that moment. They're like, I did it. I could observe myself still maintaining attention, still maintaining regulation. And instantly after one session of this training, they were able to go out in the environments that would typically trigger them. When people were finally able to go out and have dinner in a crowded restaurant. And although they could see that threat coming up, and that PTSD coming up, they were now able to use executive attention to override that threat and calm down their amygdala. So this also had an effect of lasting from 1 month to 3 months in the 3 cases reported. So it's already out there, it's already having an effect, and I just want to see how far we can take it. I mentioned children, and one thing I mentioned before, not only is it safe, affordable, if you will, but juggling is playing. Like, what if I told you you could just play and you're gonna learn and you're gonna develop all these amazing cognitive abilities and this ability to emotionally regulate yourself, and you're gonna be able to step into some of these practices that I find to be some of the greatest that we as humans have developed, like meditation and music. So that is one of my favorite things. Not to mention, play is associated with the greatest ability to enter flow state, which flow state, we increase our brain efficiency up to a quarter 500%. So that's going on. One other thing I love about especially children and juggling is the versatility of it. Juggling can be done between young people and old people. It can be done by almost anyone. I mean, even if you only have one arm, you can still juggle. I've seen people juggle with their feet. I mean, like, it's pretty wild what like you can manage to get done and just how far the boundaries of juggling really goes. Not to mention, I think it's really cool that different sexes can juggle together. How many sports did you go to school and they were always kind of separated by sexes. The boys play over here, the girls play over there. With juggling, it doesn't matter. Like, I juggle with girls all the time. I juggle with guys all the time. Like, a bunch of people are juggling. We can juggle with like 8 people at one time. It gets amazing. So, and not to mention different cultural backgrounds. It's not like something where it's like, oh yeah, I play football because I'm in America, or I play soccer because I'm everywhere else, or something like that. I know that's way too much of an overgeneralization, I'm sorry. But juggling is seen in most every culture around the world, which is really cool. So as ignorant as I am about those cultures, I have seen it, so it happens over there. And that's pretty much where I'm at. So I just want to give a special thanks to Peter Grossenbacher and Jordan Qualia. They have mentored me through this entire process and have put up with a million questions. So I really want to thank them. I want to thank my family for supporting my ability to come and do this. I want to thank my father for actually being here. That's really important to me. I want to just note that this presentation was all from Slides Carnival. And some of the evidence tools I'm doing to, actually create this experiment I'm doing and get some results on juggling is from Heart Math Institute. And then a lot of these juggling props I get are from Flow Toys, and they sponsor me to make it more affordable. So that way, hopefully, we can start to share the love. And I want to say thank you. Yes. If anyone has any questions, you can contact me there. You guys can take a screenshot. If you want to be updated with the progress, shoot me an email, shoot me a message, come up, say something. I'll be creating an outgoing email list that'll check in about every month just to keep people going and get this thing rolling. Thank you very much.